Carissa was a young Christian girl from a humble and impoverished background. She lived in a small, run-down home with her three sisters where life was a daily struggle. Their father worked long hours at a local factory, but his income was barely enough to cover basic necessities. The family often skipped meals, and Carissa's worn-out clothes and shoes were a constant reminder of their financial hardships. School trips, birthday celebrations, or even simple treats were luxuries they couldn't afford. While other kids in the neighborhood boasted about their new toys or vacations, Carissa and her sisters had only each other to share their burdens. From a very young age, Carissa dreamed of breaking free from the chains of poverty. She longed for a life of wealth and recognition, a life where she could wear fine clothes, live in a grand house, and be admired by everyone around her. To her, money was the answer to all her problems. In her eyes, poverty was not just a state of life. It was an unfair curse that robbed her of opportunities, self-esteem, and happiness. Carissa believed that money and fame would grant her the respect and security she craved, and she became determined to achieve those dreams no matter the cost. Her mother, however, had different plans for Carissa's future. Following the family tradition, her mother wished for Carissa to join her older sisters in becoming a nun. Her mother believed that a spiritual path would provide Carissa with a purpose and a sense of peace that material wealth never could. But Carissa's dreams reached far beyond the walls of a convent. She didn't want a quiet, humble life of devotion. She wanted to shine brightly in the world of fame and fortune, a place where poverty and obscurity could never touch her again. As a child, Carissa's dreams of fame and fortune seemed like harmless fantasies. Her mother would gently redirect these ambitions, suggesting that Carissa focus on her faith and consider becoming a nun, just like her two older sisters. At that young age, Carissa didn't argue much, and her mother assumed she would grow out of these lofty dreams. But as Carissa grew older, her desire for wealth and recognition only intensified. She no longer just daydreamed. She started to actively imagine herself as a star, admired and envied by the world. Her mother, however, was unwavering in her belief that Carissa's true path lay within the church. She decided it was time for Carissa to begin formal training to become a nun. She hoped that by sending her to the local convent school, Carissa would finally accept her spiritual calling. But Carissa had no intention of giving up her dreams. When her mother brought up the subject, Carissa's tone turned defiant. She refused to listen and made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with the quiet, humble life of a nun. Arguments between them became frequent and heated. Carissa's stubbornness grew stronger each time her mother insisted on the convent. In a dramatic display of rebellion, Carissa even refused to eat, locking herself in her room for days. Her mother tried to reason with her, but Carissa would have none of it. She believed her future lay in the limelight, and she was determined to prove her mother wrong. Their once loving relationship began to strain under the weight of Carissa's relentless resistance, and it was becoming clear that neither side was willing to back down. Carissa's defiance reached its peak as she fought against her mother's decision to send her to the convent. She pleaded, she argued, and at times she even shouted, trying desperately to make her mother understand that her dreams didn't align with the life of a nun. "You can't force me to live a life I don't want," she would cry out. But no matter how many tears she shed or how stubborn she became, her mother remained steadfast. Carissa's attempts to sway her mother's resolve escalated into full-blown drama. She threatened to leave home, she refused to help with household chores, and she deliberately created tense and uncomfortable situations. Every conversation turned into a confrontation, every family meal into an argument. Her mother, though visibly weary and heartbroken, refused to budge. She firmly believed that becoming a nun was the best path for Carissa, a calling that would bring her peace, purpose and protection from the struggles of the outside world. When it became clear that Carissa's stubbornness would not change her mother's mind, her protests turned into silence. She stopped responding to her mother's questions, avoided eye contact, and locked herself in her room for hours. But her mother had made up her mind. No amount of resistance, no display of rebellion would change the fact that Carissa was going to the convent. One morning, her mother finally put her foot down. Despite Carissa's loud objections, she packed her daughter's belongings and personally escorted her to the church. Carissa struggled and pleaded one last time, but her mother remained firm, forcing her to cross the threshold of the convent. Inside, Carissa felt a sense of defeat. She was now officially on the path to becoming a nun, even though her heart still clung desperately to dreams of wealth and fame. Although Carissa had reluctantly entered the convent, her mind remained far from the spiritual calling her mother had envisioned. Each day, she dutifully performed the tasks expected of a novice nun. But at night, her thoughts drifted to the life she had dreamed of, a life filled with fame, fortune, and admiration. She imagined herself walking red carpets, wearing designer gowns, and gracing the covers of magazines. While others in the convent found solace in prayer, Carissa spent her nights devising new schemes to achieve her ambitions, determined to break free from the confines of the convent walls. Her dreams seemed distant, but Carissa refused to let go. One day, a bold idea struck her. She began pestering her mother, insisting that she be transferred to another convent located in a different city. This particular convent was in a more remote and less developed area. Carissa's mother was initially puzzled. Why would Carissa want to leave the relatively comfortable convent she was in? But Carissa persisted, arguing that she was fulfilling her promise of becoming a nun and should now have the right to choose where she served. She claimed that the new convent would offer her a better environment to dedicate herself fully to her role. Her mother, skeptical of Carissa's true intentions, resisted at first. "You've only just settled here. Why uproot yourself again?" she asked. But Carissa was relentless. She assured her mother that the move was purely out of devotion to her faith and a desire to help others. Eventually, after many conversations and growing pressure from Carissa, her mother gave in. The decision was made. Carissa would be allowed to transfer to the new convent in the distant city. Little did anyone know that Carissa's motives were far from selfless. The city Carissa moved to was a stark contrast to the bustling places she had dreamed of. It was a remote and underdeveloped region where poverty and illiteracy were widespread. The local culture revolved heavily around the church, and the villagers revered their nuns and priests with unwavering devotion. In their eyes, a nun's word was absolute, a holy decree that no one dared to question. For them, the church wasn't just a place of worship, it was the center of life, the source of guidance, and the ultimate authority. Upon her arrival at the new convent, Carissa was astonished by the amenities provided. Though the town was modest, the convent itself was well maintained and much more accommodating than her previous one. She was assigned a personal attendant who handled her chores, from cleaning her quarters to preparing her meals. The facility offered better living conditions, and Carissa quickly noticed that her new surroundings provided her with more freedom than she'd had before. Carissa's charm and calculated friendliness made an impression on her attendant, who became fiercely loyal. In this region, it wasn't uncommon for people to place blind trust in their nuns. Villagers accepted their guidance without question, believing that any decision made by a nun was divinely inspired. Carissa's attendant, like everyone else in the area, held the same unwavering faith. The young woman listened intently to Carissa's every word, never doubting her intentions. It was exactly the kind of influence Carissa had hoped for. With her attendant under her sway and the villagers' trust firmly in place, Carissa knew she had found the ideal environment to lay the foundation for her plans. The people's blind faith, coupled with the better living conditions, presented her with an opportunity she couldn't pass up. A year passed, and Carissa's presence in the new town had transformed her into a figure of absolute trust. The locals revered her words as gospel, believing that someone as devout as a nun could never deceive them. In their eyes, Carissa's wisdom was divine, and her advice carried the weight of sacred authority. Her status within the community grew, and the offerings she received from the villagers, small sums of money and tokens of gratitude, steadily increased. It was during this time that an extraordinary rumor began to spread. The quiet town buzzed with whispers that Carissa, the pious nun, was miraculously pregnant without any male involvement. The idea was astonishing and unthinkable, yet the villagers clung to it with fervent belief. They were convinced that this was no ordinary event. It was a sign, a divine miracle that reinforced their faith. As the rumor spread, curiosity and amazement swept through the community. People traveled from neighboring villages to catch a glimpse of Carissa. They wanted to see for themselves the nun whom they believed was chosen by God for a miraculous purpose. The news moved like wildfire, igniting awe, wonder, and even a sense of hope among the villagers. It became the talk of the town, elevating Carissa's status to near mythical proportions. In the eyes of the townspeople, Carissa's miracle confirmed their unwavering faith in her. No one dared to question the legitimacy of the claim, and no one demanded proof. To them, Carissa's word was more than enough. And so the story of the miraculous nun continued to grow, drawing in more admirers and solidifying Carissa's place as the most revered figure in the region. The news of Carissa's miraculous pregnancy spread far beyond the small town. People from surrounding villages and even distant areas began making pilgrimages to see her. They came bearing gifts, money, and offerings, eager to pay their respects to the woman they believed had been chosen by God. Carissa's once modest quarters were now overflowing with gold coins, jewelry, and precious items, tokens of the villagers' unwavering faith. The crowd of admirers grew daily. Some knelt before her, whispering prayers, while others stood in awe, merely hoping for a glance of the blessed nun. Stories of her alleged miracle reached every corner of the region, and her name became synonymous with divine intervention. As word spread further, she found herself not only wealthy but also famous. Carissa, who had always dreamed of wealth and recognition, was now living that reality. She no longer needed to devise plans at night or wish for a better future. Her dreams had come true. The modest girl from a poor family had risen to become one of the most renowned figures in the land. Her new life was everything she had ever wanted. From her position of newfound power, Carissa looked on as crowds of strangers lined up just to leave their offerings and pay tribute. Her rise to fame and fortune seemed unstoppable, but while she basked in the adoration of the masses, beneath the surface there were still whispers of doubt and questions that hadn't yet been answered. Dr. Maria was a physician who lived in the same town where Carissa's fame had exploded. Unlike the majority of the villagers, Maria was a critical thinker. While everyone else seemed captivated by the supposed miracle, Maria couldn't help but feel skeptical. The stories she heard about Carissa's pregnancy didn't sit right with her. From a biological standpoint, it was impossible. This has to be a hoax, Maria thought. Determined to find out the truth, Maria decided to meet Carissa in person. When she finally entered the nuns' quarters, she was struck by how different Carissa appeared in real life. Beneath the serene exterior, Maria sensed something off. The way Carissa spoke, her demeanor. It all seemed too rehearsed, too controlled. Maria's instincts told her that Carissa was hiding something. After some polite conversation, Maria directly asked Carissa for medical proof of her pregnancy. The room grew tense. A few women who were present exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. One of them frowned, as if silently judging Maria for even questioning Carissa's divine status. Carissa herself, however, remained composed. She calmly replied, "I have been going to Dr. Elsa for my monthly checkups. If you have any doubts, you can see my medical reports." Her tone was even, but her expression betrayed a flicker of unease. Maria decided to review the reports Carissa mentioned. When she read through them, everything seemed to confirm the claims. Carissa was indeed pregnant. But Maria's unease didn't dissipate. Something about Carissa's behavior and the blind devotion of the villagers gnawed at her. Though she left that day without raising more questions, she resolved not to let the matter rest until she uncovered the truth behind this so-called miracle. Back at home, Dr. Maria couldn't shake her doubts. The reports from Dr. Elsa seemed convincing at first glance, but something about them felt off. Unlike her fellow villagers, Maria wasn't the kind to simply accept what she was told. Her instincts, sharpened by years of medical training, told her that there was more to this story than met the eye. Determined to dig deeper, Maria decided to ask some of her trusted colleagues about Dr. Elsa's reputation. Within hours, one of her contacts, a senior doctor, returned her call. His voice was serious as he spoke. "Dr. Elsa has a history," he began. "She's been caught fabricating medical records before. There have been cases against her, but somehow she always manages to slip through the cracks." Maria felt her pulse quicken. If the reports were falsified, then the entire narrative surrounding Carissa's pregnancy could be a lie. It would explain the unease Maria had felt during their meeting and the unnatural behavior she'd noticed. Now, with this new information, she realized she might be standing on the verge of exposing a shocking truth. Though she now had a clearer picture of Dr. Elsa's dubious background, Maria also understood that proving the deception wouldn't be easy. The villagers' faith in Carissa was unshakable, and going against that belief meant not only challenging the nun herself, but also the deeply ingrained trust the townspeople placed in their religious figures. Still, Maria knew she couldn't simply ignore what she had learned. With her mind racing, she started forming a plan to uncover the full extent of the truth and bring it to light. In the grand church hall, Carissa sat regally on a high-backed chair, her hands delicately folded in her lap. Before her, dozens of women stood in a reverent line, each holding gifts. One by one, they approached, bowing their heads as they placed gold jewelry, expensive fabrics, and envelopes filled with cash at her feet. The room was filled with whispered prayers and the faint scent of incense. It was a scene befitting a queen rather than a nun. Carissa maintained a serene expression, graciously accepting each offering with a gentle nod. The villagers, many of whom had traveled from distant towns, believed wholeheartedly in her divine status. They saw her not as an ordinary nun, but as a chosen vessel, and their offerings were tokens of their devotion. After some time, Carissa's loyal attendant entered the hall. Gently taking her arm, the attendant helped her to her feet. Carissa moved carefully, as if weary from the burden of her miracle. The women in the congregation watched with wide eyes, their hands clasped in silent adoration, as Carissa was led slowly out of the hall. Once inside her private chambers, the atmosphere changed completely. As soon as the door closed, Carissa straightened, her steps becoming brisk and confident. She let out a quiet laugh, her earlier reverent demeanor replaced by a sharp, calculating expression. She walked over to her bed and sat down, her smile widening into a grin. Carissa's body language in the privacy of her room revealed a stark contrast to the modest, devout figure she portrayed outside. Here, alone with her thoughts and away from prying eyes, the cunning side of Carissa emerged fully, hinting at the intricate charade she was carrying out. In the privacy of her room, Carissa carefully untied the makeshift band around her waist and removed the padded bag that had been resting under her dress. She tossed it onto a chair, smoothing out her robe as if shedding the weight of an elaborate costume. The transformation was almost seamless, her demeanor shifting from the solemn grace of a nun to the sharp, confident bearing of someone who had perfected a deceitful act. She turned to the pile of gifts she had received earlier that day, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Picking up a delicate gold bracelet, she muttered, "Not bad, but I've seen better." A quick flick of her wrist, and she placed it back among the offerings. Another gift, a hand-embroidered shawl, earned a dismissive glance. "This will never suit me," she remarked, handing it to her attendant, who stood nearby, silent and obedient. As she continued sorting through the treasures, Carissa couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. "The whole country's been fooled," she said aloud, turning to her attendant. "Can you believe it? They actually think I'm carrying some divine miracle." The two exchanged knowing looks, and soon both women burst into laughter. The attendant, initially reluctant, now found herself caught up in Carissa's confidence, nodding along and offering agreement with every sarcastic comment. Carissa leaned back in her chair, her fingers trailing over the smooth, cold surface of a gold pendant. "They'll keep coming, you know," she said, smirking. "More gifts, more adoration. They'll keep worshipping me without ever knowing the truth. It's almost too easy." She laughed again, her voice echoing through the room, each note a testament to her cunning and the audacious scheme she had pulled off. Dr. Maria, driven by her growing determination, couldn't sit idly by any longer. While most villagers were content to believe in Carissa's so-called miracle, Maria felt a strong obligation to seek the truth. She gathered the few scraps of information she had and set out to confront Carissa directly. Arriving at Carissa's home, Maria was greeted by her mother, an older woman with a weary but kind face. Though reluctant at first, Carissa's mother eventually opened up after Maria gently pressed her. With tears in her eyes, the woman confessed her doubts. "I forced her to become a nun," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought it was the best path for her, but I never imagined it would lead to this." The mother's sorrow was palpable. She described how Carissa's transformation into a revered figure weighed heavily on her conscience. "I just wanted her to live a good life, to be safe and respected," she said. "But now, she's not the person I thought she would become." Hearing the pain in her words, Maria's resolve only grew stronger. Carissa's mother admitted that her daughter was no longer the humble, spiritual woman she had envisioned. Instead, Carissa was exploiting the trust and faith of the townspeople. The mother wanted Carissa to stop, but her pleas had gone unanswered. Maria left the house more determined than ever. She decided to file a report at the local police station. However, when she explained the situation, the officers were dismissive. "What you're saying goes against everything the people here believe," one officer remarked. "They'll never accept that it's anything other than a miracle." Frustrated but undeterred, Maria realized that challenging the community's blind faith would require a stronger approach. She had to find undeniable evidence to expose the truth. Dr. Maria, though disheartened by the police's unwillingness to investigate, refused to give up. She turned her focus toward Carissa's attendant, the one person who had remained by her side throughout the so-called miracle. Knowing the young woman's loyalty and close proximity to Carissa, Maria decided to approach her with an offer. She arranged to meet the attendant in private, carefully explaining her suspicions. "You've seen the truth," Maria said firmly. "You know this isn't what everyone thinks it is." At first, the attendant hesitated, visibly nervous, but when Maria discreetly slipped her a sum of money, the hesitation vanished. Maria had seen from the beginning that the attendant's loyalty was rooted more in convenience than in conviction. With the attendant's cooperation, Maria set her plan into motion. The next time Carissa was alone in her quarters, the attendant secretly recorded her. The video captured Carissa laughing, tossing aside her fake pregnancy padding, and joking about how easily she had fooled the entire town. It was undeniable proof of the deception. When Maria shared the footage, it spread through the village like wildfire. The once adoring crowds turned into an angry mob. They gathered outside the convent with stones and sticks, demanding answers. But Maria, still driven by her principles, made one last move. She secretly informed Carissa, giving her just enough time to pack her things and leave before the villagers could act on their fury. Carissa vanished that very night, leaving behind the riches she had gathered and the reputation she had built. The town slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, and while the anger and disbelief eventually faded, Carissa was never seen again. Her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how even the strongest faith could be manipulated by those with clever intentions.